Well, I'm proud to be able to introduce our speaker today, Bill Acker, who's a lifelong friend of mine and a number of members of this chapter. Bill was born and grew up in Anniston, and by the age of 4 or 5, he got his first big break in life. He was accepted into Mrs. Andrews' kindergarten. And that was a big deal. That's Scott Andrews' mother. And she prepared all these kids all those years for life. But she also prepared them for Woodstock Elementary School, which Billy graduated into. And the school building is still there, in case you're not familiar with it. It's about 3 blocks east on 10th, and it's an office building there across from RMC. And they prepared him for Johnson Junior High, which was fairly new when Billy went to school there, and was later torn down and is on the RMC campus. He then went to Macaulay School in Chattanooga, a prep school, a military prep school, where he was captain of Company A. He was on the football team and secured a number of honors as a student. As you noted, and then the military was disbanded. You notice that all of these schools, or some of their functions, sort of disappear after Billy's been there. So then they prepared him for Vanderbilt, where he majored in history. He was a member of the Kappa Alpha Order, Army ROTC, and Young Republicans, among numerous other campus activities. And on finishing Vanderbilt, he came back to Anniston, where he settled. Over the years, he'd been very much involved in civic and political activity in this area, in Anniston specifically. Real early, he was in the Boy Scouts, where he earned his Eagle Scout Award. And he's been involved with the Anniston Little Theater, the Downtown Action Committee, Cool, the Shakespeare Festival. He was president of the Rotary Club, and he was the director of the Knox Concert Series. And while he wasn't doing all that, he had a 40-year business career with Private Capital Corporation, a Birmingham company which he co-founded. They arranged first and second tier financing to many and various industries, from furniture manufacturing to computer software and gasoline retailing to consumer products. So they covered the waterfront. In his spare time, he invented devices to assist amputee and paraplegic snow skiers, a medical wheelchair which facilitated getting into and out of the chair, and his crowning achievement, he developed a barbecue sauce, Texas Best Barbecue Sauce, which was good, by the way. Please welcome Bill Acker.
I'm flattered to be here today, and I hope I don't bore you all to tears. This is a fascinating topic for me. I've entitled it The Life and Legacy of John Seiver, who is also known as Nolichucky Jack. I'm going to start back a little before the American Revolution, back in the 16th century, when Martin Luther developed the schism between the Catholic Church and what later became the Protestant Church. That had a great effect on Seiver's ancestors. He was related to the seventh member actually, of the Jesuit Society, and that became the first missionary organization of the Catholic Church. But the part of the family stayed Catholic, part of the family became Protestant, and that caused a great schism, or schism as some might pronounce it. And his family fled from the Basque country, which is northern Spain, southern France. And the Edict of Nantes in 1598 essentially said that it was permissible for Protestants to worship in their tradition in France. But in about 100 years later, King Henry the fourth of France, who had allowed them to do their worship in the Protestant church, had died, and they had the revocation of the Edict of Nantes by Louis XIV in 1500. The reason I tell you all that is it's always been curious to me why some of our ancestors left Europe and came to North America. The Seiver family went to England, where Henry VIII had started the Church of England. Because Protestants were welcome there, they were no longer as welcome in France. And after a few years, the father of John Seiver, Valentine Seiver, was born in 1712. And in about 1740, he and his brother immigrated from England and came to America and landed at Baltimore. They anglicized their name in England from Xavier to Seiver, and that's how the name Seiver came about. Valentine soon married a young girl named Joanna Goad, and they moved to the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. John was born in 1745. After the French and Indian Wars broke out in 1755, the family moved to Fredericksburg, Virginia, for 2 years, and John attended school there in a school called Fredericksburg Academy. After the war, they moved back to the Shenandoah Valley, found their home had been burned to the ground. They rebuilt it and settled in and began trading again with the Indians. John was then educated at Stanton Academy, which is in Stanton, Virginia, or was, and considered to be relatively well educated for the time. When he was 16 years old, he married the lady that was my fifth great-grandmother, Sarah Hawkins, and they moved to a farm nearby. Ultimately, they had 10 children, and he engaged in multiple battles with the Indians and became known as a celebrated Indian fighter. He also founded and laid out the town of Newmarket, Virginia, where he was a merchant, an innkeeper, and a farmer. And he frequently hosted people who were traveling through the area, and one of the most famous that stayed there was Bishop Francis Asbury, who was the first bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church in the colonies. In 1771 and 72, they moved to a place called Watauga, which is now in Upper East Tennessee. And he was appointed a captain in the militia by General George Washington, and under Governor Dunmore, who was a British governor of the area. In Lord Dunmore's war, 1773 and 74, there was a long battle in which Seiver participated that lasted a full day, and 20% of his troops were killed or wounded. Finally, Chief Cornstalk was overcome, and that was the end of that war. In 1776, as a part of the Watauga Association, which was the official name of the group that had essentially west of the Appalachian Mountains, named him as a representative to the state of North Carolina legislature. And the area was then called the Washington District. And he said it was important not to construe his participation with the state of North Carolina as any indication of his interest in remaining a part of North Carolina, but he did have expressed an interest in forming a separate government area. In July of that year, Seiver and a number of other men and women had to essentially hide themselves in a place called Fort Watauga to protect themselves from Indian attacks. Early one morning, just after dawn, the Indians attacked, and the females were outside milking cows for the most part. The gates of the fort were open. The women ran back to the fort, and all but one re-entered the fort. The one who didn't make it was a girl named Catherine Sherrill. She was age 22. She climbed over the wall and fell into the arms of John Seiver. So she was not my grandmother, but she would be my step-grandmother, I guess you would say. After a day-long battle, one of the men left Fort Watauga and went to the Holston district to get reinforcements. The Indians were fighting on behalf of the British in an effort to keep the American colonists out of their villages and away from their lands. In the spring of 1777, North Carolina legislature again met, and Seiver was again appointed as a representative from Watauga. And that gathering produced the establishment of courts and state laws, and they appointed John Seiver as a district county clerk and district judge, along with James Robertson. Those of you who've spent time in Nashville have heard of James Robertson Parkway. He was indeed a famous person of that era. In January 1st of 1780, Sarah Hawkins Seiver died at age 32, shortly after giving birth to her 10th child. She was buried in an unmarked grave to prevent the Indians from desecrating her grave. The location of her grave has never been discovered. She was known as Tennessee's forgotten heroine, the first love of John Seiver's youth, and the strength of his character. She was wise, capable, and had an understanding wife and mother. And she commanded Seiver's post in his absence, which was frequent. 7 months later, on August 14, 1780, Seiver married his second wife, Catherine Bonnie Kate Seiver. She was the woman that he caught when she jumped over the wall, fell off the wall at Fort Watauga. They ultimately had 8 more children, so I had 18 relatives in that generation. Now I'll move on to one of the principal battles and enemies of Seiver, a guy named Major Patrick Ferguson. He was a Scottish officer in the British Army, an early advocate of the light infantry, which essentially was a departure from the traditional line them up and shoot. They tended to be more like scouts and raiders and skirmishers. He was the designer of the Ferguson rifle, which was one of the first breech-loading rifles ever. And he was best known for his successful Southern campaign in 1780 under General Charles Cornwallis during the American Revolution, beginning with the capture of Savannah and then Charleston. He played a great role in recruiting American loyalists who were opposed to becoming independent country to serve in his militia against the Patriots. After the British victory at Charleston, he led to a slaughter at Waxhaw. Waxhaw was a very violent battle lost by the Patriots, and even after they surrendered, the British continued to fire and kill them. So I think Seiver remembered that. You'll hear about that a little bit later. They also captured the towns of Rocky Mount, Camden, District 96, and others. But it was a virtual civil war in the South between the Loyalists and the Patriots. Despite that, the Loyalists were really not much help to the British because they tended to desert. They got tired of fooling with it, and they fought among themselves. Guerrilla forces under Marion and Sumter had harassed the British throughout their travels through South Carolina, but they were unsuccessful in defeating the British. In September of 1780, Colonel Isaac Shelby conceived the idea of raising an army sufficient to beat the British and Tory commander Patrick Ferguson. Shelby later became the first governor of Kentucky, and he and Seiver, he rode 40 miles to tell Seiver of his plan. Seiver agreed with the plan, and they attempted to raise sufficient funds to pay for the troops to go confront Ferguson and the Tories. There was essentially virtually no capital in the area at that time. So Seiver and Shelby talked to the representative, the North Carolina representative, and asked him for the money. They said they would pay it back. The Carolina representative said, if the country is overrun by the Brits and our liberty is gone, let the money go too. So he gave them the money that he had, which was about $12,000 to $13,000 at that time. It would be about $45,000 today, maybe $50,000. And that allocated about $14 per man to get them prepared for battle against Ferguson. Each man had a blanket, a drinking cup, a few had skillets, and other supplies needed for the expedition, including poached corn and maple sugar. They were dressed in hunting shirts and put a green sprig in their hat so you could tell the Patriots from the Loyalists. Bonnie Kate, his second wife, said that James Seiver, his 16-year-old son, wanted to go on the march and defeat Ferguson whether he had a horse or not. He didn't care. He was going. Seiver and Shelby raised about 240 men each at a place called Sycamore Shoals, which is near Elizabethton, Tennessee today. And the men were mostly armed with Deckard rifles. The Deckard rifle was quite unique at the time. It later became known as the Kentucky Long Rifle, and it was one of the first weapons that had rifling. So it had accuracy considerably longer than the British muskets, maybe 100, 150 yards of accuracy. They were joined by another 200 men under Colonel Benjamin Cleveland, and later joined by another 200 troops from William Campbell from Abbeville, Virginia, for a total of about 900 men. They were known as the Over-the-Mountain Men. Just prior to their departure over the mountain, Reverend Samuel Doak, who was a Scotch-Irish Presbyterian, invoked the guidance and protection, closing with the Bible quotation, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." That's from Judges 7:15. Judges chapter 7, verses 15 to 25, wherein the children of Israel had defeated their enemies. They then departed in late 1780 to attack Ferguson. On the second day of their march toward Ferguson, 2 of Seiver's men left to go tell Ferguson about the oncoming colonial troops. After discovering that, they Seiver and Shelby and the others decided they better turn north so that they would hopefully be out of the sight of the scouts and spies that Ferguson had sent out to find them. And because of that, Ferguson abandoned the flat lands of the lowlands and went toward a flat-top mountain right on the North Carolina-South Carolina border called Kings Mountain. On October 2nd, Seiver and the other commanders dispatched a message to Major General Horatio Gates. Gates had been the commander of the troops in the South after the failure and loss of Charleston and some of the other cities. But unfortunately, it was too late. The time the message got there and got back, they were looking for a Continental officer to help command them. After 10 days, on October 7, 1780, Seiver and the others arrived at the base of Kings Mountain. They completely surrounded the mountain, and Ferguson, who had declared even the Almighty could not drive him off of there, soon proved to be wrong about that. The Patriots charged up the mountain. There were several charges and retreats, recharge, retreat. But after about an hour and 5 minutes, Ferguson concluded that all hope was lost, and he tried to run through the lines of the Patriots. One of Seiver's men, who had been severely wounded several times, attempted to shoot Ferguson, but his rifle only clicked. So he turned to Robert Young of the same regiment and said, "There's Ferguson, shoot him." Young said, "I will see what Sweet Lips can do." People in those days had a nickname for their weapons, and Sweet Lip was Young's name for his. When Ferguson was shot and fell from his horse, all of the troops on his area were either killed or driven back. Ferguson received 6 to 8 bullet wounds, apparently all at about the same time, so it was never clear who actually killed Ferguson. The Tories immediately raised the white flag of surrender, but the over-the-mountain men were so enraged that they continued to fire and kill Tories, very much like what happened at Waxhaw. Young Joseph Seiver, who was John Seiver's second youngest son, was 17, had heard that his father had been killed, and he continued to fire. He said, "I'm going to shoot till I kill every last son of a bitch." And he did not stop firing until his father showed up, and then the battle ended. So to look at the size of the forces at that time, the Loyalists had about 1,105 people, 290 were killed, 163 wounded, and 668 were captured. The Patriots had a total of 900 men, 28 were killed, and 60 wounded. Seiver lost 3 men killed and 3 men wounded, including Robert Seiver. Robert had been severely injured while attempting to pick up his ramrod and received a buckshot wound near his kidney. After the battle, the British surgeon attempted to extract the shot but was unsuccessful and told Robert to remain in the area until he got better. Robert ignored that order and headed back home, accompanied by his nephew James Seiver. He died on the way back to Waxhaw 9 days later. Immediately following the battle, Seiver and others took the remaining Tories prisoner, and for fear that they would rejoin the British and attack again. So 1 week later, 9 of the Tories were tried by the Patriots, convicted, and executed for treason. One of the ones that was executed was one of the 2 people who had abandoned Seiver's unit to go tell Ferguson what was going on. Seiver did pardon the other guy who said he had just been influenced by the one who was killed, and so they saved him. Shelby and Seiver and the other commanders soon turned him over to the troops, and they returned home. Joseph Greer was dispatched by Seiver to carry the message of the victory over the British at Kings Mountain to Philadelphia, where the Continental Congress was gathering. The towering young man stood 6 feet 7 inches tall, which was extremely tall till today, but particularly in those days. And news of his harrowing journey through hostile territory caused him to become known as earning the nickname the Messenger of Kings Mountain. In December, Seiver defeated the Cherokees at another famous battle called Boyd's Creek, and in February he was made full colonel and led many other battles against the Creeks and the Cherokees. He was never wounded, but he did one time have his pigtail shot off. So I guess you got to be hit. That's a pretty good place to be hit. To this day, Seiver's relationship with the Native Americans has been remarkably complex. He was well known as an Indian fighter. He had 35 battles and 35 victories. I probably wouldn't be standing here if he hadn't done that. To his credit, Seiver led a tenuous assault on the Cherokees, moving from village to village, destroying everything in sight. Seiver's relationship with these warriors, however, could not be characterized simply as enemies. It was a deeply complicated military and diplomatic relationship, and the other Native Americans, as well as the Cherokees, it's eluded scholarly examination to this date. One such battle, deemed to have been the last battle of the American Revolutionary War, was fought, and interestingly it has the same name as the battle in the Civil War. It was called the Battle Above the Clouds, which took place on Lookout Mountain near Chattanooga. If you're ever up there looking for something to do, you can go to Ruby Falls, and in the parking lot is the historical marker. That's where the battle took place. That was on September 20th of 1782. With the signing of the preliminary peace treaty ending the war after the defeat of the British at Yorktown, thank you, getting old, a treaty was drafted in 1782, and the Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3rd, 1783. For his service, the state of North Carolina legislature presented Seiver with a sword and pistol as an expression of their gratitude. The state of North Carolina in 1784 ceded 20 million acres west of the Appalachian Mountains to the general government in Philadelphia in an effort to pay off their debts related to the American Revolution. But Seiver continued to feel that the citizens west of the mountains were unfairly treated by the North Carolinians. They would pay taxes, and they would be shipped to New Bern, which was on the coast of North Carolina, was then the capital, and they got virtually no benefit, no troops, no roads, and in Seiver's opinion, virtually nothing for that effort. So feeling they were unfairly treated, Seiver formed a group that attempted to become the 14th state after the 13 original colonies. It was named after Benjamin Franklin, an effort to get congressional support for the separation of North Carolina. That never materialized, and it was violently opposed by one of Seiver's rivals, and he had many, Colonel John Tipton, who felt that the land should remain a part of North Carolina. Seiver was appointed governor of the state of Franklin. He formed a militia, and he was named the general of the militia and entered into a peace treaty with the Cherokees for the first time in over 15 years. And interestingly, he accepted continental dollars, which you may have heard the term continental, not worth a continental, in payment for land. His interest was building up population west of the Appalachian Mountains. Soon there was a change in the attitude of North Carolina toward Sevier and what he was doing. And the state was declared in revolt, and the state of North Carolina arrested Sevier, took him to Morganton, North Carolina, and put him in jail. Fortunately, Sevier, the sheriff in Morganton, was one of his participants at the Battle of Kings Mountain, who said essentially to himself, this guy doesn't have any reason to be here. So he freed Sevier, and Sevier was never tried for that offense. Finally, after 4 years, the state of Franklin was ceded to the U.S. as the territory south of the Ohio River, and Sevier then took an oath of allegiance to the United States. In 1789, he was chosen a member of the North Carolina State Legislature from eastern North Carolina, what's now East Tennessee, and he voted in favor of North Carolina becoming the 12th colony to join the Union, leaving only Rhode Island as the last of the 13 colonies to agree to become a part of the United States. In 1790, he was elected to the U.S. Congress from North Carolina, 5th Congressional District, which is now essentially Knoxville, East Tennessee, and was appointed Brigadier General in the militia by President George Washington. In 1793, he conducted the Etowah Campaign against the Indians, which completely broke the spirit of the Creeks and the Cherokees. When North Carolina ceded its land west of the Appalachians, Washington appointed William Blount as territorial governor. Interestingly, today, Blount was the first man ever to be impeached twice by the Congress, and I think we're about to have the second one today. In 1796, Congress represented statehood, and President Washington signed a bill of law creating Tennessee as the 16th state. State elections were held in late February, and the legislature convened in late March and concluded that Sevier had won the election, and he took the oath of office as governor, following re-election in that position until 1801. When he became the governor of Tennessee, the population was about 85,000. When he ended his gubernatorial terms, the population increased to 250,000. Informal improvements such as wagon roads interested Sevier from his early days as governor. He was also frequently mentioned the need for encouragement of education. In 1802, he served as a commissioner running the boundary line between the state of Virginia and the state of Tennessee. In 1803, he became governor again until 1809. Sevier's role as worshipful master, a member of the Freemason Society, made him one of the first Freemason officers in Tennessee history. Weary of disputes over military rank, Sevier's patience was tried as he tried to handle the matters. People from various areas would recommend this person to be an officer, and Sevier either had to agree to that or not. Although he apparently handled these matters with discretion, he was frequently criticized and disputed by a person most of you will have heard of, Andrew Jackson. Over these and other matters, the two had considerable bitterness. Sometimes allies, sometimes competitors for high office. In the 1780s and 1790s, Jackson and Sevier had a love-hate relationship. Each sought to serve the public, each desired to rise economically on the frontier, and sometimes the two goals proved incompatible and frustrations flared. The men of Andrew Jackson's era, following the breaking of the rules of dueling, was a significant error. And one's character of what one's thought was difficult for one's character and what one thought of the opponent's character. Once the two men agreed to having satisfied their dispute with a duel, frequently a strong friendship would resume. In the autumn of 1803, accusations emerged in state gossip, sounds a little bit like today, that Seiver had been using his political office for personal profit. Upon leaving his courtroom one afternoon, Jackson found Seiver and a large group of Seiver's supporters waiting for him. As soon as Jackson emerged from the building, Seiver began to attack him verbally. Words and emotions escalated quickly, and no doubt egged on by the crowd, both men claimed they wanted to kill the other. Comically, the two men declared their wish to duel, but for some reason they couldn't agree on a time or a place. Letters and details of the proposals went back and forth, each man either ignorantly or willfully misunderstanding the suggestions of the others. Andrew Jackson was not known as the best speller in colonial America, so Seiver would often mock his letters with the same words, but Seiver would spell them correctly. The rules of Southern dueling require that each dueler have a second, not only to keep the duelers honest, but to have a backup should the primary fail. Seiver said he would accept any time and place named by Jackson, but it had to be outside the state of Tennessee. Such letters went back and forth several times. Finally, the two men agreed on a time and place. Jackson arrived early, Seiver arrived late. Jackson saw Seiver approaching and had an ally ride forward to Seiver to deliver a letter listing every crime that he believed Seiver had committed. Seiver, though, refused to accept the letter, and that threw Jackson into a huge rage. Jackson mounted his horse and charged Seiver, brandishing his cane as a weapon. Stunned by the man galloping toward him, Seiver fell off his horse. Fumbling around, he tried to unsheath his sword, and the sword broke. As Seiver landed on under his own horse. Satisfied, Jackson considered the matter done. The two men and their followers rode back to town happily, full of friendship for one another thereafter. A measure of chartering schools in the most of the counties was enacted in 1806, involving improving conditions in the state militia and the development of better means of settling disputes over land titles or other matters of great concern to Seiver. In March 1809, a few months before his final term ended, Seiver ran for the U.S. Senate and was defeated. To my knowledge, it was the only office he ran for where he was defeated. The following a term in the Tennessee State Legislature, he was elected to the U.S. Congress, this time from Tennessee, for 3 terms, and he served as a member of the Military Affairs Committee. During the War of 1812, he was appointed by President Madison, advising the states against the British. In 1815, Madison appointed him to the U.S. Boundary Commission to arbitrate a dispute in the boundary line between the state of Georgia and what is now the state of Alabama, then the Creek Territory. Seiver died from malaria in service on September 24, 1815, at the age of 70. He was buried at Fort Decatur, which actually only existed for less than 2 years, which was on the east bank of the Tallapoosa River near what is today Wetumpka and Millstead, Alabama. He remained there until 1889, when his body was exhumed and moved to the lawn of the courthouse in Knoxville. A monument in his honor was erected there, as well as in Nashville, with the inscription that well describes his life in public service. John Seiver, pioneer, soldier, statesman, and one of the founders of the Republic, governor of the state of Franklin, 6 times governor of the state of Tennessee, 4 times elected to Congress, a typical pioneer who conquered the wilderness and fashioned the state. A protector and hero of Kings Mountain, he fought 35 battles with 35 victories. His Indian war cry was, "Here they come. Come on, boys." Sevier County, Tennessee, and the town of Sevierville were also named after him. So I know that was a lot for you, but I appreciate your time, and if you have any questions or thoughts, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Thank you very much.